Our topic to demonstrate Web of Science co-collection today is the use of citizen science in green spaces. So as you see, I've used two search boxes, one for each set of key concepts. And for green space, I've also listed some related terms in order to broaden the search. As you will notice, I have used the Boolean connectors OR for related topics for green space. And what's really nice about all databases, including Web of Science co-collection, is it automatically generates AND in order to link our search terms. Now, if I wanted to add a new box, you already have one here, but all you need to do for an extra concept, say if you want to broaden or narrow your term, is add a row if you want to, and that's really simple.
And Marika, I just wanted to add there just briefly. So again, just to reiterate, with the kind of projects that we ask you to do in Innovation, it's often that there's a lot of different terminologies and there's a lot of different contexts. So coming back to those Booleans as being something really key that you're going to need as a tool, and the kind of ways that you search, as well as using the tools and the resources like this, is going to be really key. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and in fact, very shortly, we can sort of demonstrate how it helps to kind of alter searches on the basis of key terms as well, because that's one of the things we've been covering. So let me press search, and you notice that it defaults to topic, which is ideal for what we're doing now. Okay, so we've come up with 366 results, which is a really good number. It's worth bearing in mind that because the database keeps adding resources, you will never get the same number of resources from week to week. It'll tend to increase. So let's have a little look. What I recommend, and this is probably a really important thing to bear in mind that we need to think about today, is how you focus on the practice of using keywords to improve the search results. And this is really important. So what I suggest is it's ideal to look at the first 15 or so sets of results. So what you do is you start looking at the titles first. And for example, straight away, I noticed that this one here has citizen scientists. I hadn't thought of that one. I just thought of citizen science. So this is something to bear in mind. And just looking at the titles is extremely useful. And I would have a look at the first couple of pages, really, really helpful. The next useful thing to do is once you find an article that's useful, for example, let's have a look at this one. Using citizen science to explore neighbourhood influences. And again, neighbourhood is something I hadn't thought of in relation to my key terms. I thought of parks, open spaces, but again, neighbourhood might be useful. And this is where it's really worth spending a little bit of time looking at the abstracts, which is a summary of the research carried out. And again, it's worth bearing in mind that in yellow, we have highlighted all the terms that we have chosen for our search. However, what's really useful is to read the text and see if there are any alternative terms that you hadn't thought of. For example, here we have older people, we have the built environment, and if you look through your abstract, you will find other influential things. For example, urban planning. I hadn't thought of urban planning or landscape architecture. So this is all really worth having a look at.
I just wanted something we talked about in the other videos. In some ways, again, this kind of work you're doing here is like being a detective. It's finding the kind of the routes in and the ways to get the information that you want. Because we live in a time where there's too much information. The difficulty is trying to assess what information we need, which is the opposite potentially of how maybe 100 years ago when it was about accessing that information at all was difficult. So, you know, on this page, we're not going to go into great detail, but you've got things like, you know, got the authors, you've got other references that you can follow. They've got ones they suggest, which collection it's in. All of these give you small bits of information to help refine and kind of do your, what's the word, deduction almost. Anyway.
Exactly. And the other thing that's really, really helpful is if you look at cited references, if you're looking for related materials, this refers to all the other articles that have been referenced in this particular article. So if I click on this, you will notice that it gives me a list of all those articles with links to the library in order to have a look at them if we hold a copy of these articles. And what's really useful is if you scroll down through the 17 articles which have been referenced in this article that we're interested in reading, it's really useful because not only does it give you the list of the articles it refers to, but it also tells you how many times in the literature those articles have been quoted already. So for example, this one here, it's regarded as a highly cited paper. It's been cited in peer-reviewed journals 144 times. Can citizen science enhance a public understanding of science? So that's a really good sign. I mean, that's a sign that it's a well-regarded article that's being used.
And
so
it just
these things in mind.
It's not just that it's not just that this is related and it's useful. You can also determine to an extent here the kind of, what's the word, the authority of the article, where that's coming from, who's reviewed it. So it gives you a clue that maybe you don't want to go with the one that's had no citations, maybe the one with lots. But again, maybe all those things are citing and telling it's wrong. So you always have to look, right? But it's, yeah.
Absolutely. You always have to use your judgment. Sometimes, you know, just because an article is, usually if an article is cited many times, as Keir said, it's influential, but it may be that an article, for example, below that is an article from 2019, which has been cited once. Now, if you know, if this is something that interests you, have a look at it and make your own judgment, look at the source. And the other thing is, just because something is cited once, it doesn't mean that it isn't a good article. It could be that it's more niche, or it could be that it's more recent, because the article with only one time cited here is from 2019, whereas the one that's been cited 144 times is 3 years earlier. So it's worth bearing those things in mind as well. Okay, so I think that the advice really is, give yourself a bit of time and space, have a little look at some of the abstracts, and it will help you with either narrowing or broadening your search further down the line. The other thing worth mentioning is you will notice that when we found our 366 results, they are ordered in terms of relevance, and that's a really good thing, because in a sense, it's picking up on the key terms and it's giving you something that it feels matches what your search terms are. It's worth bearing in mind that there are two other things you can do. You can look in terms of time cited, which in a way we've already covered partly. So what this means is it orders the articles in terms of how frequently they've been cited in the literature. The older an article, the more times it's been cited if it's a good one. But the other thing you can do, if you really are interested in cutting edge and what's very current, if you go to more and click on more and look at recently added, then again, you will get cutting edge things. For example, an article that was published literally under a month ago, you can read the abstract and you can, you know, find out. Now, these are the things that won't appear in books, for example. They are cutting edge, they're brand new, and this is why you won't find them anywhere else. For example, this really fantastic one about using school pupils. Again, something I hadn't thought of. It could be an additional search term, and it's describing them as citizen scientists. So I guess those are the main things to bear in mind in the way you navigate the page. Now, to return to the things that Keir and I have been discussing in previous relation to database searches, and with Web of Science, it's very much an interdisciplinary database, which has many categories and disciplines and subdisciplines. What's worth bearing in mind is this area here, which we've already discussed. It's the Web of Science categories. And it shows you that the most articles from our results relate to ecology or biodiversity, which is or urban studies, which we've seen already. Now, what I recommend is don't just look at those top categories, but click on more options and values, as we will do now.
And I have to say, where the exciting stuff comes in. This is where you start to go, ooh, I did not expect that.
Absolutely. It's really, really fascinating. And what it does is it does them in order of frequency, but this shouldn't influence you in any way because, you know, if you're looking at something which is more niche, but it might be extremely relevant, then you need to, for example, archaeology we have here. You know, this is something that mightn't be relevant to everybody, but if you're trying to look at the cross-fertilization between citizen science and archaeology, then that's a really useful one. Or for example, astronomy and astrophysics. There's only 3. For example, stargazing, anything like that is really useful. It mightn't be something that you thought of.
And to bring up that, again, just thinking about innovation here generally, you're from 13 different disciplines. You probably got a key discipline that's mentioned there in some way, from mechanical engineering to arts to ethics, right? Now, selecting that gives you the ability to look at the stuff that you'll probably know better, be able to read better, but equally, you're a physicist, and I have to say, particularly on the citizen science projects I've done before, my physicists have tended to be some of the best on this. They can then go and look at anthropology. Okay, let's look at that. Okay, I want to see a physics one, but I also want to see an anthropology and see how they do it. And this is key to being the kind of innovative, transdisciplinary practitioner that we talk about, is by looking at other disciplines as well as your own.
Totally. And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is I start off with more results and then I pare it down. And very often when I tick these boxes, I very often tick the multidisciplinary sciences, because this is very much what you've been saying here. I'd rather go in for the multidisciplinary sciences, and the social sciences is interdisciplinary. There's only about 20 of those in total. I'd keep those in. I think it's a really good point. The other thing is, if we were to look at something more niche, for example, astrophysics and astronomy, what we do is we refine it. We click on we click on box, and then we refine it. And you only have 3 articles, but these are really, really cutting edge, and these are very specific. So for example, one about sky watching, etc. Now, just to say, just to remind you that if you do that, now you end up with only 3 results. But what do you want to do if you go back to your original search? So the tip here, the practical tip, is go to search history. And if you click on search history, it shows you the recent searches you've done. Now, once you finish for today, it won't save those unless you log in. But for today, you go for the 3 searches, but I want to go back to the earlier search with the 366. So all I need to do is click on that, and I'm back there again.
I did not know that existed. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Just honestly, at the start of this talk, every time we do these, I learn something new that completely blows my mind. It blows my mind.
I'm glad.
Much respect.
And the other great. And the other thing to bear in mind, for example, if you're interested in, re-establishing woodpeckers in New York City, you have a look at this. You look at your abstract, but then how do you go back to your searches? You can either go to search history, or if you go back to search here, it brings you straight back, and you don't need to worry about having lost your searches. So that's worth bearing in mind. It's a bit slow today. Okay. The other thing that I thought might be useful to cover now that we're on Web of Science core collection is how do you widen or narrow your search? So I hadn't thought about, for example, citizen scientist. So if I go back to citizen science in my original search, I will go back to the root of the word, and I will put an asterisk. And then that means it will cover citizen scientist as well as citizen science. But I also found a really interesting term, which was participatory science. So I've decided I want to increase my searches. So I will add participatory science.
And just whilst you're doing that, again, one of the things we always ask you to do is you have to show evidence of your research, right? And that's just key in research generally. One of the things that we want to build on, I think, in innovation is that you go beyond this idea of just, we did some searches, right? And I think part of this is starting to build up a database of this kind of work, right? So your kind of research accounts that we ask you to do, you being able to say, well, okay, we start with citizen science, but actually what we then started to broaden our search terms was to more like nature reserve, green spaces. We looked at specifically anthropology here. That tells a much more convincing story about the depth and the kind of the range of research, as well as obviously being the best thing to do because it's practically. But for us, in terms of assessment, this allows us to follow that. And not just in terms of assessment, if you were writing published papers, you show how you do research, particularly if that's the focus of your argument. So again, just being able to store these, even in a text file somewhere, to say these are some of the terms we use is really key.
And also what you're describing here is you're describing the process of information management and digital literacy. And these are transferable skills. If you're applying for a job, you can use these examples as a demonstration of how you are a researcher applying techniques and tools and enhancing your academic and professional skills. So that's a really useful thing to show. You describing those steps is a way how you could describe how you actually did research before you even are officially, you know, become a researcher in a company or do a doctorate or anything like that. So what we've done is we've decided to broaden the search. So I click on search now. And what you will see is we come up with more results as is expected. However, what do you want to do if you narrow the search? So let's go back again. And you go here and let's go back to our original one. The one we had, sorry, I'll keep that as it is. And let's say that you've discovered that quite a lot of people have been doing rather interesting research on bees because of the worry of bees being extinct, etc. So if you add a row and you add a new concept, different from the other concepts, you see that it adds and automatically for you, the database. And let's see what happens there. Okay. So you've narrowed it down to 167 results, but these are far more specific to that topic. So I hope that this has been a help. The one thing to say is you will notice with Web of Science, it can be rather unforgiving if you make a slight mistake in how you type things in. So for example, I do notice that I've typed in or twice here and I try to do a search. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you get this rather alarming in red saying search error, invalid use of Boolean terms. So what you need to do is you need to have a look at the syntax and how you've written things and change it because it comes up with absolutely no results that way. But you can, you know, because you've already established how you do Boolean searches, it will help you, you know how to look for the errors and sort it out.
This is just something I want to bring up in terms of neurodiversity. Like, it's difficult for people generally. I'm dyslexic. I find this stuff very particularly hard is seeing certain letters off, and I find this in my programming. What I would say is, though, again, once you start to build up a database of search terms and use of those search terms, you can copy and paste and add stuff in. There's, you know, there are ways to structure that information if you struggle with certain aspects of this, like I really do. But there are strategies for that. And I think, again, once you start to get a handle on this, particularly if you've got something like dyslexia where you find, you know, information processing difficult, you can start to process information quicker and not rely on your own brain. That's all.
Thank you, Kieran. No, absolutely. And the final thing to say is, I mean, obviously, if you want to sign in, that's really good because all the search history I showed you, it basically, you can save your searches, etc. However, if you're just doing this on a one-off basis over and over again, not a problem. You can still save the important articles that you're interested in. So just completely arbitrarily, let's say that I'm interested in these 3 articles. So how do you save them? You go to export, you click on export, and here you have a choice. The easiest thing to do is to email them to yourself. So what you do is you click on what you want to save. I would recommend doing author, title, source, and abstract, because then you get an email and you also have saved the abstract with the content of the research. So what you do is you just put your email address in here and you send yourself the email. The alternative you can do, if you're using a reference management tool like EndNote Online, is you go again to export, and you go to EndNote Online and you email the results to yourself, etc. Sorry, you sign in and you send the results to yourself. But it's worth saying here that we have a separate section with useful information where you can find specific information on how to save and export your searches.
And again, that's something we'll go through in class, and it has to become part of your practice. So as someone, again, who had something like 1,000 citations for their PhD, but set up a management system on their first day of their PhD to sound smug, it really helps. And it's something we'll go through with you, because it turns research from, oh God, I've got to manage this and find some citations, to, oh, what am I going to find today? The bits that are difficult that you need to do and can be complex become useful. All right, thanks again for a wonderful session.
Thanks, Keir.